They say a mother's love is unconditional. I believed that until the night my daughter opened the door, looked me in the eye, and told me I wasn't welcome in her home. Not even for the 4th of July. Not even after everything I'd given up for her. I heard my grandchildren laughing just a few feet away as she shut me out, choosing someone else to stand in my place. It felt like my heart cracked right there on the porch. Have you ever felt the sting of being replaced by someone who never sacrificed a thing for them? Stay with me till the very end, and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. I'm Patricia Miller. I'm 66 years old, and last 4th of July, I stood on the front porch of my only daughter's house in Houston, Texas, clutching a warm apple pie I'd baked that morning. The sun was hot on my shoulders, and I remember smiling to myself as I imagined the look on her face when she saw me. I could already hear children laughing somewhere in the backyard and the faint hum of music floating through the screen door. When Lauren opened the door, she didn't even look at the pie in my hands. She didn't even smile. Her eyes were cold and her voice flat as she said the words that froze me where I stood. "Mom, you're not welcome here. I only invited my mother-in-law." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Surely this was some kind of joke. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Behind her, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses seemed to grow louder, like the whole house was mocking me while I stood there mute. She shifted her weight like she couldn't wait for me to leave. Then, without another word, she pushed the door closed, and it shut with a sharp click right in my face. My fingers tightened around the pie, and I just stood there staring at the doorframe, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I could hear them all in the backyard. I could even pick out Diane's laugh light and happy the way I'd always dreamed my daughter would sound with me. But she chose someone else. She chose Diane. And I was left standing on the porch like I didn't even belong to her anymore. Have you ever felt discarded by someone you love most? That moment stays with you. It's not just the words or the slammed door or the pie growing cold in your hands. It's the way your heart cracks in a quiet, private way no one can see. It's the way you suddenly feel like a stranger to your own child. I turned and walked back down those steps as slowly as I could, holding my head high, even though my chest felt like it might split open. My feet felt heavy on the walkway. Each step away from her door felt like a little death. I kept telling myself to breathe, just breathe, but inside, I could already feel something breaking, something I wasn't sure would ever heal. That walk down the porch that day brought me back to all the other steps I'd taken in my life for her. 30 years of steps I'd taken alone. When her father died so young, she was just 6, and I remember sitting on the edge of my bed the night of his funeral, staring at the dark and telling myself I didn't have time to fall apart. Not with a little girl counting on me. I went back to work full-time the very next week, taking every shift they would give me at the hospital. Nights, weekends, holidays. I'd come home just in time to make her breakfast and get her on the bus. Some mornings, I would sit in the kitchen, still wearing my scrubs, my eyelids heavy, sipping coffee, and watching her chatter about her day, like I wasn't running on an hour of sleep. It was hard. Harder than I let anyone see. I missed parent-teacher conferences because of double shifts. I sat on hard bleachers at basketball games in a haze of fatigue, but I never let her see how tired I really was. She was always clean, her hair neatly done, her lunches packed. Every birthday, I'd string up balloons and bake her favorite cake, even if it meant staying up all night. I can still picture her 8th birthday. That year, she wanted a party at the skating rink, and I could barely afford the deposit. But I worked 3 doubles that week, smiled through every hour, and handed the cashier a stack of crumpled bills to pay for it. When she blew out those candles and hugged me, I thought, this is worth every minute. Later, when she decided she wanted to go to college, I sat her down and promised her she would go. I picked up another job on weekends just to make sure she wouldn't have to take out too many loans. Sometimes I'd sneak into her dorm room after a long shift to drop off bags of groceries because I worried she wasn't eating enough. I sold my wedding ring the summer she graduated. Not because she asked me to, because she called crying, saying the down payment on her first little house fell through, and she didn't know what to do. I remember sitting at the jeweler's counter with tears in my eyes, but my voice steady. That house was hers by the end of the month. Through all of it, I never thought of it as sacrifice. She was my baby. You don't count the cost when it comes to your child. I worked, I gave, I went without, but it didn't feel like loss at the time. When I think of all the nights I walked home from the bus stop in the dark, feet aching to pay for her dreams, I don't regret a single one. But standing outside her door that day, pie in hand, hearing her choose someone else over me, it made me wonder how she forgot. How all of that became so easy to throw away. I raised her to believe she could be anything. I just never thought I'd raise her to believe I was nothing. It didn't happen all at once. It was small things at first, little moments that stung more than I wanted to admit. Texts that felt short, rushed, like she didn't have time for more than a few words. She'd call me only when she needed a sitter, always last minute, like I was just another name in her phone. There was never a real conversation, just instructions about what time to come over and what snacks to give the kids. No asking how I was. No asking if I even could. Then there were the holidays. The first time she said they'd be spending Thanksgiving with her husband's family, I told myself it was fine. But then Christmas too, and Easter. I sat at my kitchen table alone, pretending it didn't bother me, but it did. She stopped inviting me to birthday parties for the grandkids. I'd see photos later on social media, her smiling next to her mother-in-law, and it felt like I was looking in on someone else's family. Every year, there seemed to be fewer and fewer chances to see her, like I was being quietly pushed to the edges of her life. What hurt most was how easy she made it look. How she'd laugh and smile around that woman like they'd shared a lifetime together, while I sat at home waiting for a phone that rarely rang anymore. I tried to bring it up once to ask if something was wrong. She brushed it off, said I was imagining things, but her tone was so dismissive it shut me right up. After that, I stopped asking. Then came that message, a little card in the mail with her handwriting on the envelope. My heart lifted just seeing it, thinking maybe she was finally reaching out. I opened it and saw the date and address for a 4th of July cookout. For the first time in months, I let myself feel hopeful. I even baked a pie like I always used to and bought a new blouse. But when I showed up, she didn't even let me inside. Standing there, she told me she'd only invited her mother-in-law. That moment crystallized everything. Years of being set aside, ignored, used only when convenient. All the quiet hurt I'd been swallowing finally rose to the surface. And for the first time, I let myself feel angry. I stood there on her porch, clutching the pie to my chest, as though it could shield me from what was coming. The sun was hot on my back, and the smell of grilled meat floated through the air. I could hear the faint buzz of laughter and music from the backyard, and for a split second, I let myself believe this was all a mistake. But then she opened the door. She didn't even smile. Her voice was calm, almost casual, when she said they thought it would be awkward with both grandmothers and they had chosen Diane this year. It took me a moment to understand what she meant. My mind froze on that word, chosen. Like it was a contest. Like I was nothing more than a name crossed off a list. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat tightened so hard I could barely breathe. She just stood there looking at me like I should understand. Like it wasn't a big deal to shut your own mother out of her family's celebration. Then I caught sight of them through the window. My grandchildren sitting at the picnic table laughing with plates full of food, while Diane threw her head back and clapped her hands at something funny they said. She looked so at home there, it made my stomach turn. I couldn't look away. My granddaughter leaned her head on Diane's shoulder, and my grandson handed her a sparkler. And in that instant, something inside me cracked. The sound of their laughter, mixed with the slap of the screen door, when Lauren started to close it behind her. I stood there as the door clicked shut, staring at my own reflection in the glass, and all I could think was how easy it was for them to pretend I didn't exist. How easy it was to replace me with someone else. I turned and walked down those steps, the pie still pressed against me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like her mother. I felt like a stranger on her porch. And the anger that rose in my chest was hot and quiet and steady. I drove home that night with both hands gripping the wheel, my knuckles white against the leather. The streets were quiet, just the hum of my tires and the faint boom of fireworks in the distance. I didn't even turn on the radio. When I walked through my front door, the house felt colder than usual. I set the pie down on the kitchen table and sank into the chair across from it, staring at the neat golden crust as if it might offer me some kind of answer. It was still warm, but I didn't have the heart to touch it. My phone buzzed in my purse, and I pulled it out with a strange kind of hope. Maybe she'd thought better of it. Maybe she wanted me to come back. But the message waiting for me was nothing more than 3 hollow words. Hope you understand. I read it over and over, but it didn't make sense. Understand what? That I wasn't wanted anymore. That my place in her life could be given away to someone else as easily as that pie sat untouched in front of me. A heaviness settled in my chest, a deep ache that made my breath hitch. It was a feeling I'd never known before. Not when my husband died. Not even during all those nights I cried myself to sleep worrying about how to make ends meet. This was worse because it came from her. I sat in silence for what felt like hours, watching the shadows creep across the table. My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. Not yet. The anger was there too, a faint spark beneath the weight of it all. At some point, I realized I was gripping the edge of the table so tightly my fingertips hurt. I let go and smoothed the cloth beneath my hands. That spark of anger stayed with me, though quiet but alive, like an ember buried in ash. She may have thought she could throw me away. But somewhere deep down, something was starting to shift. Something telling me I didn't have to stay broken forever. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, even though I'd barely slept. My head felt heavy, but my mind was clear, sharper than it had been in years. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring at the same apple pie from the night before, and I decided right then that I was done feeling sorry for myself. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning, not even the few friends who still called me now and then. There was no point in talking. Words wouldn't change anything, but action might. So, I called a lawyer and made an appointment that very afternoon. When I walked into his office, I felt a strange calm settle over me, like I already knew this was the first step towards something bigger. We went through my accounts, my home, the little investments I had made decades ago. He sat back in his chair at the end, smiling faintly, and told me I was worth well over $1 million. I blinked at him, stunned. Not because I didn't think I deserved it, but because I'd never really thought about what all those years of saving and scrimping had added up to. I had always just handed everything over to Lauren whenever she needed help. That night, I went home and thought about what to do with it. At first, I considered putting it all into a trust for the grandkids. But then I pictured Diane in that yard, her arms around my granddaughter, her laugh echoing while I stood outside in the dark. It made my stomach turn. So instead, I sat at my kitchen table and started sketching out a plan. I wanted to take everything I had left in me and turn it into something that mattered. Something for women like me who had given everything to their children only to be thrown aside when someone better came along. I called it the Forgotten Mothers Foundation. The name came to me so quickly it almost startled me, like it had been waiting all along. I worked on it in silence for weeks, meeting with lawyers and accountants, designing a mission statement, reaching out to local organizations that helped older women in need. No one else knew what I was doing. When Lauren texted asking if I could babysit one Saturday, I just replied that I was busy. I didn't explain. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed her an explanation. There were moments when I caught myself staring at old family photos and feeling a pang of sadness, but I wouldn't let myself fall back into that hole. I'd look at the pie still sitting untouched on my counter and remind myself why I was doing this. Each time I signed a document, each time I wrote another check to fund the foundation, I felt a little stronger. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell anyone about the anger bubbling under the surface. I just kept going one quiet step at a time, building something they couldn't ignore forever. I wanted justice, but not the kind you shout about. I wanted it to unfold slowly, deliberately, and for the whole world to see when the time was right. And in the stillness of my little kitchen, as I filed the final paperwork, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. The first article popped up on a local community blog. A small piece about the Forgotten Mothers Foundation, helping provide housing for an older woman left homeless after her kids stopped calling. It didn't have my name, but word traveled fast. Soon, a few photos of our team appeared on the foundation's social media page, and someone tagged me. People started asking around, who was this Patricia Miller, and why hadn't anyone heard about the work she was doing before? Within weeks, the foundation's mission began spreading through Houston. A few of Lauren's co-workers started commenting on the posts, some even sharing them. Then came the curious looks, the quiet questions. Someone must have asked Lauren why she never talked about her mom. I knew the party was coming. Her birthday had always been an over-the-top affair, especially now that her husband was in finance, and they had the means to throw a backyard event that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I didn't get an invitation. I didn't expect one, but I showed up anyway. I didn't walk in with drama. I waited until things were in full swing. Waiters passed hors d'oeuvres music floated from rented speakers, and white balloons dotted the hedges like little clouds. I wore a simple dress and carried a small stack of brochures. When I entered, Lauren's face froze for a moment. It was so brief, most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. She didn't make a scene. She smiled too tightly and walked over with that strained tone she used when she was trying to control something. She asked what I was doing there. I told her I'd just stopped by to drop off a few brochures since some of her guests might find them interesting. Before she could stop me, I turned to the group of women by the wine table and spoke clearly. I told them about the Forgotten Mothers Foundation. I explained how it was created to support women who had given everything to their families and then been forgotten. People stopped talking. Some of them nodded. One woman even reached for a brochure before I'd finished speaking. Lauren's smile cracked. Her husband came over trying to steer the conversation elsewhere, but it was too late. The air had shifted. I didn't need to say anything more. I just handed out the brochures, smiled, and walked out through the garden path. Behind me, the murmur of conversation had changed. It was no longer carefree. It had turned inward curious and just a little uncomfortable. The next day, I saw one of Lauren's friends had reposted one of our foundation videos. Another had followed our page. Messages trickled in from strangers saying they recognized themselves in our mission. Lauren didn't call. She didn't text. But I knew the mask had slipped, and for once, she had to stand there without it. In the months after that party, the Forgotten Mothers Foundation took on a life of its own. Word spread quickly as more women came forward sharing stories just like mine. Stories of quiet heartbreak that had gone unnoticed for too long. Donations started pouring in, small at first, then larger checks from local businesses moved by our mission. We began expanding our programs, offering not just housing and food assistance, but also job training and legal help. The first community award came 6 months later, handed to me on a small stage with a spotlight and warm applause filling the room. I remember standing there feeling something in my chest unlock, knowing this was bigger than me now. By the time our first anniversary rolled around, we had helped over 200 women. Some came back to volunteer, bringing their grown children, eager to give back to the foundation that had given them hope. News outlets started calling me for interviews. They called me strong, called me a pillar of the community. but I just thought of myself as someone who finally stopped letting people walk all over her. Meanwhile, Lauren's world began to shrink. Her smile at work seemed tighter, her social circle a little thinner. I would hear through others that people had started asking her why she never spoke about her mother when everyone else was talking about the foundation. A few acquaintances unfollowed her online, while the foundation's page gained thousands more. The contrast was impossible to ignore. My days felt full of meaning filled with gratitude and connection, while hers looked increasingly hollow. I didn't take any joy in watching her struggle, but I couldn't ignore the irony either. She had chosen to shut me out, and now found herself standing in the shadow of something I had built from nothing. Every gala, every smiling face of a woman we had helped reminded me that strength grows when you stop begging for love that isn't given freely. Each time I saw another woman stand on her own 2 feet again, I felt my own resolve harden, my own sense of self-worth restored. People sometimes ask me now how I found the courage to do it. I always tell them it wasn't about courage so much as survival. When life pushes you out, you find another door. And on the other side, you might just find yourself again. It was almost exactly a year later when Lauren showed up at my door. She didn't call first. She just stood there, her shoulders small and her eyes glassy, like the weight of her choices had finally settled on her. I opened the door and stepped aside, letting her in without a word. We sat in the same kitchen where I'd once stayed up late baking birthday cakes and sewing costumes. She couldn't quite meet my gaze at first. She started talking in a quiet rush, saying how sorry she was, how wrong she'd been, how much she missed me. I listened without interrupting, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my heart surprisingly steady as she spilled out her regrets. When she finally looked at me, I could see her waiting for absolution. But I didn't give her the easy comfort she seemed to expect. I told her forgiveness was a process, not something I could hand over just because she decided it was time. I told her trust takes time to rebuild and that love, real love, requires respect. Her eyes welled up then, and for the first time I thought maybe she truly understood what she had done. We talked a little more, and I assured her that I didn't hate her, that my door wasn't locked forever. But I also made it clear that my life no longer revolved around being wanted by someone who once made me feel disposable. She nodded, tears falling, and we said goodbye for the night. As I closed the door behind her, I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't even feel sad. I felt at peace. That weekend was our second annual Forgotten Mothers Foundation Gala. The room sparkled with lights and soft music as women filled the tables, many of them in bright dresses and hopeful smiles. They came up to me one by one, hugging me, thanking me, sharing their own stories of healing and strength. Standing at the podium, looking out at all of them, I felt whole in a way I never had before. I thought about Lauren as I spoke to the crowd that evening. I hoped she would find her own way to become the kind of person who gave respect as freely as she expected love. But my story was no longer about her choices. My story was about what I chose to do when I was told I didn't belong. I left the audience with the words that had carried me through this journey. Love requires respect. Don't let anyone make you feel disposable. And as the room erupted in applause, I knew in my bones that I would never let myself forget that truth again.